with a PowerPoint presentation. Hopefully everybody can see that. So just to give a kind of brief recap on what the manager's hearing is, in chapter 2, section 3.2 of the Winchester Code of Bylaws, there is a requirement for there to be a warrant article on any article that has not previously had a public hearing by the town manager. So we'll be discussing tonight any article that has not been previously discussed. Article 4 is one of the ones that we will not be discussing. That's the MBTA 3A zoning that was subject to a planning board hearing, both on last evening, and then there was one earlier in March. And we'll also not be discussing any finance committee articles. So there's a hearing tomorrow evening that the finance committee will be holding starting at 5:30 p.m. and they will be discussing articles 14, 15, 18, 27, 28, 29, 30, and 31. So we will not be hearing any comments or discussion on those articles this evening. Joining me this evening is our town council, Jay Tallerman. We also have several members of our select board here. The kind of run of the show for this evening will be that I will, as we go through the articles, I will put up on the screen what the article and the motion is, as you should have received your motion book earlier this week. I will just give a very brief overview of each of those articles. If there is a proponent for the article, select board, capital planning committee, or other various boards or committees, I will offer for that proponent to make a brief statement, and then we will entertain a variety of questions and answers as we're able on those articles. The goal of the hearing is not to debate the articles before us. That is reserved for the floor of town meeting, but we're here mostly for an informational purposes so that people can become more familiar, so that we can hopefully answer your questions. And if we don't have the answers to your questions this evening, we will hear them and be able to hopefully have those answers for a town meeting. So with that, I will jump forward. So as we've kind of mentioned to people in the notifications for this hearing, we're going to be starting a discussion with Articles 9 and 10. These are the two articles related to the Community Preservation Act. So Article 9 and 10, excuse me, Article 9 first is the article that would allow, if passed, this article, which is sponsored by the select board and it is a majority vote, would allow the ballot measure to be placed on the ballot in November of 2024 at the presidential election for the town to pass the Community Preservation Act. What's proposed, as I've highlighted in red, is for a property surcharge of 1.5% on the annual real estate tax levy, and then to have several exemptions. First is the town hereby accepts the exemption related to property owned and occupied who qualifies for low income housing or low or moderate income senior housing in town, as defined in Section 2 of the Act. Also exempt is $100,000 of the value of each taxable parcel of residential real property and $100,000 of value of each taxable parcel of Class 3 commercial property and Class 4 industrial property. So with that, I will turn it over to our select board representatives, Anthea Brady and Mike Betancourt, if they want to make a brief statement, and then we can take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Beth.
Thank you, Beth. Anthea, I'll let you start if you'd like.
Sure. Town meeting members are familiar with the CPA from when we introduced it in the fall based on work that was done with a CPA study committee that was formed over the summer. The committee looked at the Community Preservation Act, the history of it in terms of how it was passed in the legislature, and the towns, cities and towns who have adopted it, as well as how they have done that and what their approach has been. So the study committee has developed and shared a report about the CPA. So it discusses in a bit of more detail the approach to the surcharge and the exemptions, as well as the various areas within the CPA, historical preservation, open space and recreation, and community housing, and how the town could approach different projects within that area. The main point of Article 9 is that as town meeting members look at this, the vote is to bring this to the voters in the next regularly scheduled election, which is the November election. And then the town's voters would vote on whether to adopt the CPA after this is brought to them. Mike, if there's other things to add.
No, thanks, Anthea. Just to discuss a little bit how we arrived at the surcharge with the Community Preservation Act. You can go up to 3% surcharge, and there are certain exceptions that you can apply. So we've applied the exception for low-income residents, but also to take off the first $100,000 of value of the property as well. And so when we look at 1.5% surcharge, that is 1.5% of your tax bill, not of the appraised value of your home. So when we were looking at the needs of the town, we spent a lot of time looking at what are the underfunded important items that don't necessarily rise to the top of the capital queue. And we look at this as the 1.5% surcharge generating somewhere around $2 million a year, including a state match of $300,000 or $400,000, depending on what the fund can develop throughout the year. So it's a healthy surcharge. We felt that it was kind of right in the middle of what we could ask, and gives us an opportunity to be strategic about funding certain priorities for the town, and relieving some pressure on the capital and building stabilization fund, and really also taking care of some strategic priorities like affordable housing and historic preservation.
Great, thank you. So with that, I'll take any questions on Article 9. There's a few in the chat, so I'll read those. The first comes from Roger Wilson. What is the cost of administering the CPA, i.e. low income exemption?
It's a good question, Roger, and something that we looked into. And Beth, you can certainly correct me on this, but it's very minimal, and this is information that we already have, and we use to apply other exceptions for low-income members of the community and seniors. And what we're actually, and I know Jay, you weighed in on this a little bit too. It's very minimal what we can use. So we couldn't add staff in order to manage the CPA process, or manage some of the other administrative tasks. It's a very small amount that we would be using out of the fund in order to manage the process.
Right, and typically, Mike, this is treated like any other of the many affordable units that we have in town. To the extent the money is extended for the purpose of obtaining a restriction or purchasing property that would be restricted as affordable housing, there's a tried and true method for managing those restrictions over time. It is not particularly expensive. In the case of a rental, there would be a monitoring agent, and they would derive their income from the process itself. It would be basically minimal in the terms of a sale. It really only comes up with respect to notice when there is a proposed sale. And even then, there's a specific process that follows per the state requirements under affordable housing restrictions.
Yeah, and thanks, Jay. And I think too, you'd kind of put a finer point on it for us in one of our select. Roger's specific question about the affordable piece. The administrative piece is very limited as well, as far as what you can spend on the overall management of the CPA process. I think some people are concerned that we're getting a state match, and we're generating all this additional revenue, but then we're going to be really wasting the benefits of it on administration.
And there's a cap on that too. I mean, it's 5%. So it's generally the administrative expenses are for things like taking minutes, having someone to help with a little bit of the paperwork coming in, and for things like appraisals that we need to obtain. That's pretty routine for towns that have the CPA.
Roger has his hand raised. Patty, could you let him in, and we'll, if you have a follow-up question, Roger.
Yes, I'm aware of the 5% cap on the expenses that are specifically attributed to the CPA. But what about the sort of soft costs of all the time that staff is going to spend, for instance, in meetings? When I look at the minutes of other towns' CPA committee meetings, they're often attended by numerous officials. So you have the 5% of hard costs, and then what additional percent of sort of soft costs of all the time and complications of following this law?
So I can speak to that a little bit, Roger. I think, there's obviously going to be some overlap between the CPA process and the capital planning process. There's already staff time involved with presenting projects to the capital planning committee, preparing those requests. And I think, we're looking to kind of streamline the process in terms of how we work out the process for evaluating whether a project is CPA funded or capital, or eligible for funding under CPA or capital planning, or both. So I think, I think there's already a lot of staff time being dedicated to the development of those project requests, and this will just be kind of a different mechanism for how they're funded, as opposed to additional time in terms of developing the project requests or attending meetings.
So just another question, would you anticipate that that we would have a process similar to Arlington, where people basically sort of apply for CPA expenditures, or would you see this as integrated with our current capital identification, project identification, et cetera?
Roger, there's a lot of different strategies for implementing the CPA and making recommendations to town meeting about those priorities. And I think Arlington tracks with a lot of other communities that do have that application process. And the spirit of the CPA is that there can be those community projects that may not have come through our capital process. And so it's a way for things to come into our queue to discuss and prioritize that we might not see otherwise. But certainly everything will kind of converge through our capital process if they're capital requests. But some of them may not be. So I see in other communities there's some form of the application process. I imagine ours will be somewhat hybrid as well, because we do have a very intentional capital planning process.
Anything further, Roger?
Not that I want to waste everybody's time with at this point.
Thank you. So there's a question in the chat from Amanda Lewis, and the question is, what is the typical amount that households will need to pay if the CPA is adopted, assuming a $1 million home, for example?
So on page 6 of the CPA report, there's actually a table that lists estimated annual surcharge rate. And so for that $1 million assessment, it would be $163 for an annual surcharge.
Thank you. The next question in the chat from Daniel Nakamoto. There are a number of issues that we can target for the CPA funding. Will there be a prioritization of where to spend these funds?
Well, I think, as I mentioned before, the spirit of the process is that we have to put 10% in each one of the priority buckets for affordable housing, open space and recreation, and historic preservation. And then the balance of that is really decided through the process and the committee that is established through the bylaw, which is required, and of up to 9 members, which we'll talk about in Article 10. And so the prioritization, I think, will come from those stakeholders that are on the committee, and certainly our town staff, and we'll be supporting that process as well. So there's the initial strategy of the CPA, and then there's the money that needs to be decided to meet those objectives as well.
Great, thank you. The next question in the chat is from Bill McPadden. It says, for clarity, how is real estate tax levy defined? Does that include past and future overrides, Chapter 110 funds for water and sewer, etc. amounts? Patty, I believe that Stacy Ward is here as a participant, and she would be able to help answer that question if you want to bring her in. Stacy Ward is the town's comptroller.
I don't see her here.
She just raised her hand.
Oh, because she's at the top. Okay, she's in.
Thank you.
At least she should be.
Hi, good evening. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you, Stacy.
Excellent. Yeah, so the tax levy is calculated based on the cumulative levy, which would have included any and all general overrides that had increased the tax base in perpetuity, and then any debt exclusions that are currently in place, which change depending on the debt that we vote and issue. So hopefully that helps answer that question.
Any follow-ups to that question while Stacy is here with us? All right. Go on to the next, from Susan Nardone in the chat. Who will be responsible for distributing the funds, and is there a table of percentage for each beneficiary, i.e. 25 for historical, 25 for affordable housing, 25 for outdoor recreation? If not, how are the disbursements priority decided?
That's a good question. Stacy, I don't know if you wanted to answer that, but
Yeah, I can answer some of that after you, Mike.
Yeah, I was just going to say, as I mentioned before, 10% is required to go into each of the buckets each year. And what is remaining can also be contributed in different proportions to pursue those same priorities. And the good news for town meeting members is all of those recommendations will always go back to town meeting for a vote. So they won't be approved unless they go through our legislative body. So just like our capital process. So town meeting will be able to see how we've balanced our capital needs and working with the CPA. And you see a lot in other communities where the CPA and the capital stabilization and building stabilization funds will each fund a piece of different projects. And so that helps with some of our strategic initiatives that it can't be just directly funded from one of those sources because sometimes the bigger projects just cost more over a period of time.
And yes, and to add to what Mike is saying, we would put those 10% required amounts in a reserve, and until they're appropriated by the town meeting body, we wouldn't disperse any of those funds until directed by town meeting for a specific project. And I can imagine at first, while we're getting started, we would put the reserves away, and I would account for those reserves separately in the general ledger, and they would grow over time. And then once we're ready to appropriate, then we would make those distributions.
So to put a finer point on it too, the statute requires they either set aside 10% or spend 10% on the 3 categories. So if you have in any particular year 10% of the overall revenue that's coming in being dedicated to either a big historical preservation or a big open space project, then you don't technically have to set aside the 10% as well. However, it's pretty routine for towns to have a town meeting article that annually sets aside the 10%, notwithstanding that there may be separate articles for appropriations from that fund or the undesignated fund for big purchases.
Thank you. So I think Carol Savage had a few questions, which I think Stacy may have already answered the first one, which is how the town would account for the CPA revenue and outlays. Would that require setting up a new stabilization fund? So it's not a stabilization fund, it's just accounted for in the general ledger.
Yeah, it's just a special revenue fund, and I would count for the CPA revenues separately from any other town revenues, and any expenses and reserves and any other activity associated with the CPA fund would be all separated.
And the second question from Ms. Savage, building on Amanda's question, I assume that if the town taxes rise by 2.5% annually or more with an override, presumably the 1.5 would be applied to each year's new tax bill. That is correct. Okay, follow-up from Mr. Wilson. What is the hurry on putting this on the ballot? Why not work out the specifics first?
You know, it's a good question, Roger. We have been working out quite a lot of the specifics and feel like we have worked them out. And our timeline here was to bring it to spring town meeting, and then the voters town-wide in the fall. So you're required to bring it to your local governmental authority. For us, that's town meeting, and then immediately following going out to the voters. So at your next local election. So it was recommended to us by the Community Preservation Coalition that doing it during a presidential election gets a lot more engagement from the community, and a lot more people are voting and participating at that point. So we put off doing this project for a year so we could have a lot more engagement with residents, develop the process, and make sure that we had all the information we needed to complete an accurate study report as well. So we will continue outreach post town meeting if town meeting decides to put the question on the ballot. But I think that part of the process is that the things can change down the road on how the committee is run itself once that committee is in place, but they will always come back with their recommendations to town meeting.
Second question from Mr. Wilson, who will manage a given appropriation? Will the CPA committee have a role after an affirmative town meeting vote as they do in Arlington?
I don't know, I feel that one a little bit. Roger, I think it really kind of depends. The CP or the Community Preservation Committee will have a role following generally. How specific that role is, it can be subject to specificity within the town meeting vote itself. For example, for certain expenditures, they may want to get approval for particular work on, say, a historic preservation project of the Community Preservation Committee before the money is released. But generally speaking, they have a little bit of an oversight role as to what is expended, as well as other entities, including obviously the treasurer, Beth's office, and other folks who may be involved, the Conservation Commission. But it can be as specific as the motion under the warrant article makes it.
Thank you, Jay. Next question comes from Colin Simpson. Can you please explain MAGL 44B, B 1.5 or 0.5, and how the CPA rate was decided as 1.5% and not 3%? Does not B 1/2 require making an additional commitment of funds for other sources not greater than 2% of the real estate tax levy when less than 3% is adopted?
I'm not sure. I'm not following the question particularly. I would defer to Michael and Anthea on why 1.5 and 3% and not 3%.
Yeah, I think that, as I mentioned before, we put a lot of time and research into it, and Hafisa Adam G from the Finance Committee modeled a lot of the different scenarios. And we were really trying to find out what our need was, and looking at some of our capital spending, spending on historic preservation projects, open space recreation, and affordable housing over the past several years and into the future. And we thought that the 1.5% was the right amount based on our high property values here. So, 1.5% is a lot more revenue than it is in some communities throughout the Commonwealth. 3% we felt was great, but it was almost too much for what we needed, and so we were trying to be a little considerate of that. It's attractive in the sense that if you do the 3%, you get into an additional group of people where you can get or communities where you can get additional funds, but it really would have been too much of a surcharge at the same time when we're looking at putting the Lynch School and maybe a general override, on the tax bill for voters. So we were just trying to find balance, and we felt 1.5% was that balance.
And just to clarify, under the statute, communities can select anything between 0.5% and 3%, correct? Okay, next question comes from Carol Savage. Will our current accounting software be adequate for accounting for CPA revenue collection and management? And if Stacy's still here, I defer to you on that one.
Yes, we have a fund software which is very capable of handling this.
Great, thank you. Mr. McPadden with a follow-up. Once a surcharge percent is determined, can it be changed? If so, what would be the mechanism? Would it go back to town meeting or the voters?
Jake can correct me on this, but I do think that there is a waiting period of 5 years until we can change that percentage once it's put into place, and it would be the same mechanism to change that percentage as created it. So, and there have been no communities out of almost 200 that have adopted the CPA that have repealed it as well. So.
Yeah, the 5 years is definitely on revocation, and yeah, it's the reverse process if we wanted to change or the same process if we wanted to change the percentage, and that happens from time to time.
Thank you. The next question here from Mark Feblowitz. Apologies if I slaughtered your name there. I see that the library roof is being repaired, which is good because leaks have touched the historic mural. Had we approved CPA sooner, could the roof repair be addressed at least in part by CPA funds? Are there provisions to reimburse prior projects such as this one? So the work that's happening right now at the library roof is actually some destructive testing to evaluate the current condition of the roof. The town meeting has previously approved funding for design of roof repairs and also some immediate repairs at the library, which will be bid this spring, but we still need to secure the funding for the final roof replacement piece. So that is certainly something that can be considered as part of CPA project discussion. Next question from Amanda Lewis. Is it correct that the state will put budget surplus into a CPA trust fund that our community can draw from?
I'm not particularly sure about that, but if the state increases their match, then we benefit from it. That match has varied over time. It was 100% when this first got started. So whatever funds they put in for the match, it can vary year to year.
Yeah, they have in the past when they've had a lot of communities adopt. They have had to add more funds into the state trust fund, and they have added from budget surpluses in the past. So it's not something that they are required to do in any way or anything, but it's certainly something they have done.
The next question is a follow-up to a previous one. Is there a 5-year waiting period to repeal?
Yes.
Thank you. And the next question from Ms. Savage, will you be providing to town meeting a list of projects in the 5-year plan that could be eligible for CPA funding, and what projects the town has funded recently could have been eligible? So that's something that Ms. Savage attended the select board meeting on Monday night. It was something that we had discussed, and that's something that I'm working on putting together right now. and working with the board to clarify that material ahead of town meeting.
And we also have on the Winchester website, on the CPA page, there's a list of upcoming capital projects and whether those are CPA eligible.
Thank you. Next question from Jennifer. Thank you. Maybe getting ahead of things, but has any thought been given to how this will be communicated to all town residents? So this will be a ballot question at the if it goes forward, if town meeting approves, it'll be a ballot question at the November election.
So I think we will follow what other communities have done and set up a ballot committee and really a campaign behind that, as we would do for an override for a school or general override. And we'll be doing everything that campaign would involve, and be looking for volunteers and people to help out for that outreach process going into the election, if it is the November election, if it is approved this town meeting.
Any further questions on Article 9? Brian Benaglia had asked at the beginning if we could discuss Article 37, Motion 2. I would be happy to, after we get through Article 10, I would be happy to move forward to Article 37, Motion 2 at that time. Okay, seeing no further questions, I think we'll move on to Article 10. So Article 10 is a majority vote sponsored by the Select Board. This article seeks to amend the general bylaws by adding a new Chapter 25, which would be entitled Winchester Committee for Community Preservation, which would be the creation of basically a CPA committee here in Winchester. I do not have the full language in the PowerPoint presentation, but I do have the motion book available. I'd be happy to put that up if there's specific questions. So first I'll hand it over to Mike and Anthea and see if there's anything you want to mention about this, and then I can pull that motion up if that would be helpful for people to see.
Yeah, this is the bylaws required as part of the CPA process, and this is kind of the implementation side of it. So the Article 9 is to put it on the ballot for voters, and if it's approved, then a committee is created around how to disperse the funds and how to establish priorities and how to work with other stakeholder groups that are relevant to the purpose of the CPA. So you know, we initially we were advised to hold off on that until after it is approved, if it is approved, but we heard from some stakeholders and some town meeting members that they wanted to see a bylaw come contemporaneously with the enabling legislation in Article 9. So we worked on that with stakeholder groups, town council, and select board members, and have come up with a 9 committee bylaw, and which we think represents the best way to set up the committee and how it will proceed.
Great, thank you. So the first question in the chat is from Susan Verdicchio. Can a town meeting member serve on the CPA committee?
I don't see why not.
Great, thank you, Jay.
And just to add, the membership of the committee indicates members, sort of residents at large who are appointed, who may also be town meeting members.
Next question from Carol Savage. It'd be helpful to show the proposed membership of the committee on the slide. So let me stop my share here with this. And I will bring up the bylaw.
And as Beth is pointing up, I'll just mention that the first 5, I think it's A through E that you're seeing on the screen there, are required as part of the state legislation. So the other ones we had the ability to tinker with a little bit.
So the question from Amanda Lewis is, I assume there's a good roadmap for the bylaws since almost 200 communities have them, correct?
Yeah, maybe we can turn that over to Jay as well, but the bylaws are fairly standard across communities. As Mike mentioned, there's the 5 required members, and then there can be up to 9 total members. And then many of the provisions that follow are very standard as required. We've added some specifics and tweaked the language so that it matches other language within Winchester, and added some provisions around intersection with the capital committee.
I think the other thing there too, to note that in addition to the fact that this is more or less a standard practice with some customization town to town, there's still requirements in the model bylaw for study and for interaction between the Community Preservation Committee, here are WCCP, and other boards and committees that may have a stake in it. So notwithstanding whatever the membership is, my experience as well as just directly what's in the bylaw is that community preservation committees do work closely with other boards and committees in the town, whether they're open space oriented or historic commissions or affordable housing committees or capital planning committees. It's generally a pretty collaborative process.
So I see there's a few questions, and Ms. Bergstrom has her hand raised, but there's first a request from Robert Johnson to call out the list. So I will just read the list of folks who've been proposed to be part of the Preservation Committee. So first is 1 member of the Conservation Commission as designated by said commission, 1 member of the Historical Commission as designated by said commission, 1 member of the Field Management Committee as designated by said committee, 1 member for the Winchester Housing Authority established under the required Mass General Law as designated by the authority, 1 member of the Planning Board as designated by the board, 1 member of the Select Board as designated by the board, who is also the board's representative to either the Housing Partnership Board or the Affordable Housing Trust, 1 member of the Capital Planning Committee as designated by the committee, 1 citizen member at large who does not hold elected or appointed office nor serves as a town employee as designated by the Select Board, 1 citizen member at large who does not hold elected or appointed office nor serves as a town employee as designated by the Finance Committee, and then finally the town manager or their designee as an ex officio non-voting member. So I think we can go to Michelle Bergstrom next. I think she had her hand raised, unless that went down.
Sorry, Beth, I was just trying to see the questions.
Oh, sorry. Can
That's
people
okay.
see,
Thanks for
people see
recognizing
the questions when they have them up there on my screen? I'm not sure if that's actually sharing.
Yeah, the Q&A is right next to the raise your hand.
Okay. No worries. Thank you. Next question is from Susan Verdicchio to follow up on paragraphs G, H, and I, say who does not hold elected or appointed office. So Jay, I think that was your
Right, but they could, a fair point, but they could be a member of one of those other boards. So, I mean, town meeting members can be members of other boards or committees, so it's not a bar for the at-large positions. It does say no elected office.
Next question from Karen Bolognese. Just to clarify, the question from Susan Verdicchio is in town meeting member elected individual. So I think that you just answered that question, Jay. And Sarah asked, I don't see how a town meeting member as an elected official can be part of this committee. So I think that's what you just said, Jay, for the citizens at large, correct?
Right.
And then Maura Sullivan, MGL Chapter 45, Section 2 requires the select board to stand in for the board of parks commissioners in a town that doesn't have one. If the planning board doesn't fill that role, why are we seating the select board in one of the 5? Why aren't we seating the select board in one of the 5 required seats? So the select board is identified in item F here as a designated appointee.
And the language of the CPA is actually a little different. While I understand the point of Chapter 45, Section 2, the statute suggests that others that may form a comparable role to a park commission could be the entity that serves in that regard. But in any event, it's somewhat academic because the member of the select board is a member here. But the field management committee was named as someone who forms a comparable role to an entity that might normally be a recreation or a park commission.
And I guess the follow-up question is the select board filling in for housing in F? Mike or Anthony, I don't know if you want to field that one.
Yeah, so the select board member there is not necessarily filling in for housing, which is item D, the Winchester Housing Authority, but it is adding input from Housing Partnership Board and or Affordable Housing Trust, who have a somewhat different role within housing within the town. And Mike, feel free to jump onto that.
I think
Yeah, a little context there. The statute says housing authority is a required member. And I think that's because housing authorities are required in each town. Not every town has to have an affordable housing trust or an affordable housing partnership. So here, because they perform different roles, and there is a decent sized role for the housing partnership and the housing trust here in Winchester, it was determined that to have some amount of representation from that entity as well. And this was an appropriate way to handle that.
So a follow-up question from Ms. Sullivan. So it's standing in for parks and housing. I'm all for housing partnership or affordable housing trust, but select board shouldn't be standing in for both, maybe.
Policy question, I would say, for those that are voting on this.
yeah, I think that's fine. I mean, I don't think the select board isn't standing in for field management, right? That's their appointment, if I'm understanding the question. But you know, and certainly if there were to be a housing partnership board representative in place of the select board representative, I think that would be a fair, you know, amendment for us to discuss. We discussed the Affordable Housing Trust at a meeting this afternoon, and because the Affordable Housing Trust is really the primary mechanism for funds to move from, once they're appropriated from the committee or from the fund to the trust to make that expenditure. We created the trust for that purpose. It may be, you know, somewhat of a conflict of interest to have the Affordable Housing Trust be a direct representative on the committee because the trust would be receiving those funds. But certainly Housing Partnership Board, you know, I don't think that, you know, we feel strongly, you know, about, you know, having a lot of leverage on the committee. But you know, I think having some select board presence might be helpful, but is not necessary either.
Question from Roger Wilson. Isn't the field management committee specifically sports oriented, not park or open space oriented?
So the CPA allows for both open space and recreation. So the field management committee is involved with the recreation aspect of that, which can include sort of our fields, our grass fields, and spaces. So we found that was an appropriate addition in this sense, to be sort of the representative in lieu of the Parks Commission.
Thank you. Next question from Carol Savage. I think this composition makes a lot of sense and thank the committee for bringing the bylaw forward. It brings key voices to the table. Have the stakeholder groups represented in the proposed bylaw so far supported this language? Second question, there is an amendment being brought forward that asks about whether there should be staggered terms. Can you speak to that? So I don't know if we'll parse these out into two. First question is, have the stakeholder groups represented in the proposed bylaw been supportive of the language?
The members of the study committee, which involved Conservation Commission, Historical Commission, Fields, Planning Board, Affordable Housing, and a representative from the Finance Committee, voted on the composition of this voted on the composition of the committee. Also included a member from from the school committee. So as well, we've met with several of these boards so far recently who have been voting on their positions on these two articles. And then in terms of the amendment to staggered terms, as we designed this, we considered that since many of these people are representatives of other boards, that there may be some natural turnover to the board in terms of the 3 years, and that it wasn't necessary to begin with some staggered terms and put 1 year, 2 year terms on some of them, just because of some of the natural timing of that. Some advice we've received as well is that there's a benefit to having people gain some experience and get their footing with the committee, and so having a shorter term of 1 to 2 years as the committee is initially composed and kicked off might not be long enough for people to really get involved and engage with the committee.
Oh, next question's from Stephen Boksansky. Would the proponent consider expanding the number of at-large citizens from 2 to 6? This would make it more inclusive and bring a strong community voice. I believe there's a cap on the number of.
Yeah, we can only have up to 9 people, so we've kind of maxed out there. And as I mentioned initially, A through E, those 5 are required, and so we didn't have a lot that we could necessarily work with, and we wanted to make sure that the stakeholder groups that are really represented in those buckets and have visibility to those priorities are there. So it's a good question, and I'm sorry I have to run out to Beth and Thea, everyone. I've got to get to the PISC meeting, but thank you very much, and thank you everybody for attending.
Thank you. Any further questions on Article 10? Okay, seeing none, we'll go back. As I mentioned, there was a request to jump to Article 37, motion 2, so I'll do that now. So Article 37 is our standard motion that we put forward every year regarding regarding the acceptance of reports, dissolve old committees, or authorize new committees. So there's actually been 2 motions made under Article 37. The second motion here is the one that pertains to the CPA. So this motion came forward under this article from the Capital Planning Committee, and it reads that it moved and seconded the town meeting create a committee to review the bylaw adopted by 2024 springtime meeting. This obviously assumes the bylaw is adopted for the town of Winchester that implements the Community Preservation Act as approved at 2024 springtime meeting. If amendments to said bylaw are recommended, they shall be presented to fall town meeting for review and consideration by vote. In addition to reviewing the bylaw, the committee is directed to develop and report back for town meeting approval policies and procedures on how the CPA will be integrated with the current town capital planning process. The committee shall include the town manager, 1 member of the finance committee appointed by that committee, 1 member of the select board appointed by the board, 1 member of the capital planning committee appointed by that committee, and 1 or 3 at-large members appointed by the town moderator. The number shall be at the discretion of the town moderator. The committee shall have access to town staff and town council as needed. So this committee would actually be a committee created by town meeting, similar to the, as some people may recall, the communications study committee that was created a few years ago by town meeting and then reported back to town meeting. So this would be sort of a similar sort of committee report that would come back to town meeting. I believe Roger McPeak from the capital planning is here this evening. Roger, I'll open the floor to you for a moment if you want to say anything about this proposed committee.
Sure. What you're seeing here is capital planning trying to get to yes on the CPA. When this was first presented the last time through the citizen petition, we expressed reservations about understanding how this would all work, how the CPA would work with the existing capital planning process and vice versa. We were not involved with the CPA working group, so we had no input to that process as this moved forward. And the warrant was delivered very late in this process after the warrant initially closed. We don't believe that there's been sufficient time to understand how this will all work together and call us a skeptical committee in that assurances that it'll all just work out are not very well taken. So what we would like is for this committee to be formed by town meeting to allow an opportunity to define the interaction between the CPA group and capital planning, how projects are divvied up between those two, and how things get worked out in that fashion. As you've heard from some of the questions earlier in this evening, there are some questions about how the details of this would actually work, and we would suggest that this committee would go about defining that.
Great. Thank you, Roger. Happy to take any questions that folks may have on motion 2 under Article 37. Okay, first question from Brian Vernaglia. Why was the decision made to only include capital, select board, and FinCom? Why are planning board, fields management, affordable housing, et cetera, excluded?
The answer to that is this isn't a committee that's looking at defining what goes into the membership of the bylaw or anything else like that, unless town meeting wants that evaluated. What we're looking at here is taking the groups that understand the interior workings of the town, that understand how the town works, the gears, if you will, of getting things done, and looking at how we can integrate the CPA in with our capital planning process and come up with one unified view of what's going on. And that's what the real issue here is. This is what has gotten CPC. If we can get 9 passed and 10 passed, this is what gets a favorable review or a favorable recommendation, a favorable action from capital planning to answer those questions about how does this all fit together? How do we make it work in reality, not just a hope that it will work?
Thank you, Roger. Next question from Carol Savage. The select board is planning to conduct a strategic planning process for capital planning that would likely include those same groups. Might their planning processes cover these questions?
I can't speak for the select board.
Michelle or Anthea, I don't know if you want to answer that question. I think it's we should note that the select board has not taken a position on motion 2 under Article 37 yet.
I'll defer to Michelle to come on and respond to this if she'd like to.
Michelle, we can't hear you if you're talking. Maybe we'll come back to that one. The next question was from Chris Nixon. If Roger doesn't mention this, the Capital Planning Committee has voted to support Articles 9 and 10, but is seeking conversation and understanding on how these two processes can work well together. Thank you, Chris, for that note. Next question is from Pamela Court. Isn't that the job of the CPA committee, which has a CPC member? Roger, I don't know if you want to address the differences in bringing this motion forward.
I will say that that does not ensure coordination. That ensures some cross-pollination. And what we're looking for is an understanding of how there may well be, we didn't even anticipate that, there may well be citizen petitions on the utilization of CPA funding. And does that automatically go to the CPA, or does it become a town capital project that needs to be considered by both? Traditionally, the way that things percolate out is through the departments, and the town manager controls that and is ultimately responsible for that. But this new process of funding things through what will become the WCCP doesn't take that into account.
I just also want to mention, Pamela, the difference in timing. So the CPA committee that is subject to approval under Article 10 would not be created until after this goes to the ballot and assuming it's approved by the voters. Roger, the motion that you're bringing forward under Article 37, the intent is for that work to be done between now and springtime meeting, or excuse me, between now and fall town meeting, with a report coming back to fall town meeting about what the integration of those two processes would be. So just in terms of the timing of those two things, I just want to make the note there. And I think the intention is that with the capital planning committee, if this discussion would happen and be ready to go once the ballot measure was approved, and then we were ready to start discussing projects to be funded. Question from Roger Wilson: would it be possible to require that all CPA projects originate with the town manager? Jay, I don't know if you want to take that one.
I'm sure Beth would like more on her plate than she currently has. You can't mandate that. The CPA, projects could certainly originate with the town manager, but you couldn't mandate that the CPA only, or the CPC or the WCCP only consider those projects that originate with the town manager. That would be a violation of the statute.
Thank you. I'm going to go back up and see if Michelle wanted to address Carol Savage's question.
I'm happy to. I don't know what you answered because I actually moved rooms and my connection dropped. So let me speak to what the select board is planning to do. I'm not sure, Carol, if it answers all these questions, but select board, and you'll hear about this Monday night in Article 1. We've been looking at capital in the fall. We were looking at potentially a debt exclusion override. John Fallon and I worked together to look at a series of projects. We're leveraging some overlay funds to do some work with the high school gym floor. That's one of our articles. So we're looking broadly at strategy, absolutely, for capital planning, sort of capital with a capital C, not just historic buildings, not just recreation. Those are some of our needs. And we're looking at funding sources and what's available, what votes might the select board put to voters on, raising tax revenue, what levers do we have to pull? So I'm not sure that our process, our sort of study, which will involve additional stakeholders from town as well, will look at the interplay of these two capital planning processes. What we will, though, look at is potentially priority for the town manager. So it is the town manager's plan, which is one of these later questions. It is the town manager's capital planning process, and what might some of the direction be from the select board on capital priorities. But I think to the answer that Jay gave, I'm not sure. In the same way that the town manager can't dictate CPA projects, I'm not sure that the select board would dictate CPA priorities either, but we will be looking at, the overall capital process and hoping to get a strategy that we can articulate to town meeting. I hope that answers the question. And I'm sorry that I dropped and moved rooms.
Of course. Thank you, Michelle. There's a follow-up question from Pam Court. Said, thank you, Roger McPeak. What kind of authority would you want the committee to have?
I think that one of the necessary things is for them to walk into it open-minded. One of the amendments that I've seen, the amendment that I've seen proposes one mechanism, which is that if a project is CPA eligible, that it should first be evaluated by the WCCP for funding. That's one approach. It's certainly one that we would want to look at. But you might just say you want to put into place a series of guidelines that comes up with a different mechanism. I'm not sure what that is. The authority that should the authority be in the bylaw? Should the authority be a set of guidelines as we use for the capital and building stabilization funds on how town meeting wants to see those funds utilized? That could be another mechanism that would be put in place. Those guidelines have served us well for 18 years. And, the committees abide by them. So it could be something that goes into the bylaw. It could be something that just creates a set of guidelines that we all agree to play by.
Thank you, Roger. Any further questions on Article 37, Motion 2? Okay. Seeing none, we will go back up to Article 1. So we'll just start with Article 1 and then run our way through the rest of the articles. Several of these are easy ones, like Article 1, which is reports of various town boards, officials, committees, and commissions. And then some of them are consent agenda items. So I'll run through these, and please, if you have questions, raise your hand or put a question in the chat. We can stop and answer any questions folks have. Article 2 is a 2/3 vote. It's on the consent agenda. This is a standard article we have every year with respect to attendance at town meeting, and this article will be indefinitely postponed. Article 3 is a majority vote, and this is the report to hear the report of the planning board. Milan has her hand raised. If you want to go ahead and answer, bring her in, Patty.
No questions in the, okay, you can ask.
Go ahead, Milan.
Oh,
Hi, Beth. This is actually Megan. We're
Oh, hi.
Megan Black, watching it together. But
Nice.
a question about the prior article. Could you explain the rationale for it being indefinitely postponed rather than just voted by town meeting? Thank you.
Yeah, I think there was just there was no issues. This is sponsored by the Committee of on Rules, so this only comes forward if there's people who have not attended the required number of sessions of town meeting.
Look at us, we had good attendance. Yay.
Skipping Article 4, because as I mentioned, that was subject to hearing by the planning board. Article 5 is on the consent agenda. And this is bringing forward, as you may recall, back in the fall, we had a new section of the bylaw with respect to the permanent street tree committee. And there was just a little cleanup that needed to have to be done with respect to the definitions after that new bylaw was passed. So this this article is bringing forward just a cleanup to the definitions. Jay, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, it was just an oversight. Last year, were focusing on the meat of what they were trying to accomplish, and there was just a small inconsistency with one of the older paragraphs. So this just cleans it up by removing an inconsistent definition with what we already did at town meeting in the fall.
Great. So I think we together thought this would be a fairly uneventful article, so we have put it on the consent agenda. But obviously, as folks know, that any of the items can be pulled off the consent agenda with a vote of town meeting members. Article 6 is a majority vote, and this is brought forward by the retirement board. This article is to see if the town will accept provisions of Section 26 of Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 32, as amended by Section 34 of Chapter 176 of the Acts of 2011, so as to provide a stipend to the members of the Winchester Retirement Board in the amount of $4,500 per year, or take any action in relation thereto. And I believe we have the chair of the retirement board here with us this evening. I don't know if you want to raise your hand and we can let you in. If not, if Stacey Ward is still here, she may be able to help answer some questions.
I'm here if there's questions.
I don't see, I think it's Skip is the chair. I don't see his hand being raised. Patty, I don't know if you do.
I'm not sure if he was able to make it tonight. The fire department lost a fellow firefighter who had retired. So there was I believe the wake was today and the funeral's tomorrow.
Okay.
But if there's any questions, I can certainly answer them, or if there's information people want or need,
Okay.
I can try and help out.
Looks like there's a few questions in the chat, so I'll just start. First one is from Milan. Would this potentially lead to compensation to other volunteer boards? I don't,
It could certainly,
Well, not this particular item because there's a specific statute, but I mean, town meeting could vote to add stipends to other boards and committees if they so chose. This is a specific provision that allows for this stipend, but so it's not like precedent setting. It's just, you know, a decision that the town could or can choose to make if it wants.
thank you, Jay. Next question from Brian Vernaglia. Are there any other committees elected or appointed in town paid for their service?
the only other committee or board that I'm aware of is the Board of Assessors, who receive a car allowance, which is about $95 a month for their role in getting around town and reviewing some assessment information.
Thank you. Next question from Roger Wilson. What are the occupations of the respective members?
Okay, let me see if I can do this. The chair of the board is Robert Frary, and he is a current firefighter for the town of Winchester. We have another fellow who's Philip Champa. He is also a firefighter for the town of Winchester. They're both the elected members. The select board appoints a member, and that's Michael Lucas. He's actually the assistant comptroller. And the fifth member, who is elected by the rest of the board, is Tom Tracy. He is the former city auditor of the town of Watertown, and he served on their retirement board for, I believe, well over 20 years. So he's an excellent, he's got an excellent history and experience, and I am the ex officio member as the comptroller.
Stacy, there's a question, a follow-up from Mr. Wilson. Would the ex officio member be compensated? So maybe you want to address that.
Yes, I am currently compensated as my role as ex officio because I support the day-to-day activities of the retirement office, which is run by the retirement administrator.
Thank you.
And I'm paid $3,000 currently. It would bump up to $4,500 if the other board members are also paid.
Thanks, Stacy.
Yep.
Next question from Carol Savage. Can you give the rationale for this motion?
Sure, I'll do my best to speak for Skip. He's the real champion of this article. Over the past maybe 10, 15 years, the requirements of board members has increased where I'll just run down the list of things that have changed. We're required to attend 18 hours of educational training. The board's responsible for really focusing on getting fully funded and accomplishing the fully funded status. We hear and we review investment reports. We're responsible for setting investment policies. We hear requests for retirement benefits, application for disability and other retirements. We review and hear requests, complaints, appeals. And some of those can reach court action or court level. We also have to defend our decisions. We hire staff. We review personnel performance. We set salaries for the retirement office. We sign all expense warrants and approve all expenditures of the retirement office and anything retirement system related. And we also have to log into portals for PERAC. We have to upload certain financial interest information, which is a requirement by law to file the statement. Let's see, we have to, what else? I'm not sure if that's a comprehensive enough list of things, but with this board, we're pretty hands-on and involved with the activity of the retirement board.
Thank you, Stacy. I'll go to Robert Johnson. I think you have your hand raised. Patty, you could let him in. Okay, Mr. Johnson, I think you're in. If you want to unmute, you can ask your question.
We'll take the hand down.
Did you have a question?
No question.
Okay, thank you.
I would like to add one thing, Beth, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
One of the other comments the board member was sharing earlier was that we want to make sure that we can attract quality, engaged members, and where some members feel like if we don't offer some level of compensation, the interest and engagement might decline, but I don't know that all of us board members feel that way. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Great, thank you. Next question, is this new or renewing compensation they already received?
I am the only member who receives compensation at this time,
Thank you.
and that's in the law.
Next question, does this open the door to compensate other boards that work a lot like select board, school committee, planning board, and FinCom? No, Jay, if you wanna.
This article itself wouldn't, like Jay had mentioned earlier, it wouldn't mean that would happen in the future, but it could just be a philosophy change where currently we don't have any other boards that are compensated and also put a lot of work into the town.
Thank you. Robin Voss, how was the 4,500 chosen as the appropriate compensation?
The range is between 3,000 and 4,500, and I believe it was just decided to go with the top of the range in today's market. Not that 4,500 is a lot of money. It's really just an incentive to reimburse for some out-of-pocket costs and to assist in the cost of now having to use your home computers and other things. I mean, I hope I'm relaying Skip the chair's message. Well, Robert, I'm sorry, his name is Robert Ferry, across.
Thanks, Stacy. I think Pam Court has her hand raised. Pat, if you want to bring her in.
Hi, thank you. I guess my concern with this is how it was determined that this would be the board to receive compensation. Was there a comparison of work hours that is done with the other boards that I mentioned in my question? How do we ensure that this is done fairly? Because there's an enormous amount of work that is done by our board members. Some board members do a lot more work than other board members. Home resources are used by these board members as well. They drive to places, they use their home computers. It's a huge amount of work, and these positions do require, we require the best people for these positions. And for the most part, we've had some really amazing people who in our town, we're lucky, who have volunteered for these things and do so well. I worry more about losing the ability to attract people to fill these roles if some are paid and some are not. It just seems very arbitrary, and I think I would be concerned that I'd want more information about how this is implemented in a fair and just way for a community who is governed primarily through volunteerism.
Okay, thank you. I don't know that that's necessarily a question for us to answer, but just remind everybody that any kind of debates of the merit of these items is reserved for the floor of town meeting and not this hearing, but it's good information, Pam, for the proponent to consider as they come forward to town meeting.
I guess I apologize. I didn't mean to argue the article, and I apologize for that. What I wanted to know, what the question is what kind of analysis has been done in terms of the number of hours that this board puts in versus other boards, and looking at if any of that has been done. I'd be curious to see.
I can answer that question slightly. I will say that when this came up for discussion, my comment to the rest of the board was, I'm not sure this is something that the town would entertain, because none of the other boards who work hard, if not harder than the retirement board, we all work hard and we all have a sense of honor serving on these boards. And that point was brought up. We did not look at and put down on paper all the hours they all work. It was really just a concept. And the board had decided, if this is an opportunity for us to receive compensation, why not? And I completely understand where you're coming from, as the rest of the board does as well. But they figured we'd present it to town meeting and see if there's an appetite to allow for the compensation.
Thank you, Stacey.
Thank you.
Next question is from Robin Voss. Please clarify the funding source for this compensation.
This is from the retirement funds, the investment funds that are maintained in the retirement systems activity.
So there's no impact to the town's operating budget or request for funds through a separate article for this.
Correct.
Next question from Mr. Wilson. Am I correct in understanding that 4 members of this board are already town employees?
Yes, you are correct.
Any further questions on Article 6? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to Article 7. Article 37, excuse me, Article 7 is on the consent agenda. This item is to see if the town will vote to amend the stated use of funds approved at the fall 2016 town meeting, Article 11, to include all work under the MWRA's LWSAP program, a program for the purpose of rehabilitating community water systems, or to take any other action in relation thereto. So this is an article we actually, town meeting approved the funding, the town to get funds through the MWRA program, this LWSAP program in 2016. The way that article was written at the time, it was very limited and only limited to the use of those funds for lead lines. There's actually, in fact, a wide range of projects that the town could use those funds for as they relate to improving water quality in our town. And so we are just seeking to open the use of those funds to all of the uses allowed under that MWRA LWSAP program. We're not looking to get additional funds through that program at this point, just to expand the availability of uses that we can use that money for. So hopefully that provides a bit of clarity on it. Any questions on this one? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to Article 8. Oh. Question from Mr. Wilson, what is the status of lead removal? So we'll get to that one in a future article. We do have a funding article before town meeting this spring for that. Article 8 is a 2/3 vote. The proponent is the select board. And this is to see if the town will vote to accept an easement from the MBTA for the purposes of both facilitating the construction and long-term use and maintenance of 2 additional culverts to allow for expanded passage of the Aberjana River under the railroad tracks behind the Morocco Elementary School, along with any other ancillary easements, and further to authorize the board to enter into any agreements that may be necessary to achieve this. So as most folks know, the MBTA, or excuse me, the last project in the town's flood mitigation program is to install 2 additional culverts under the MBTA railroad tracks behind the Morocco School. In order to complete that work, we have to get a series of permits from the MBTA, and we also have to get a permanent easement for the MBTA for those culverts to exist there in perpetuity. This article just gives the select board the authority to enter into those documents. We are still working with the MBTA on finalizing the terms of those agreements. But this article is not voting on the easement itself, but just giving the select board the authority to enter into those agreements. So I'm happy to take any questions on Article 8. Okay, seeing none, we will move on to Article 11. Article 11 is on the consent agenda. This is a 2/3 vote. This is one that looks, I'm sure, very familiar to folks. This article is sponsored by the select board. As you may recall, last fall, the board came forward with a request for funding based on what we knew at the time through the 100% design plans for the Lynch School and the proposed installation of solar panels on the Lynch School roof. Very shortly after town meeting, we actually opened the bids for the Lynch School Elementary School project, and we were very pleased that we were able to actually include the construction of the solar piece within the existing funds for the project. We did use the $300,000 in free cash that was authorized by fall town meeting, but we do not need to borrow any additional funds. So Article 11 will rescind that borrowing authorization that was approved last fall for the $3.2 million. Any questions on this article? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to Article 12, which is also on the consent agenda. This is a standard article we have every year in case there are any bills that come in from prior fiscal years. Happy to say that we have not had any come in this spring, so this article is proposed to be indefinitely postponed. Article 13 is on the consent agenda as well. The town manager is the proponent for this article. This is a standard article we have every year that relates to the PEG access and cable related funds where we transfer funds that we receive into that account. Any questions on this one? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to Article 16. This is also on the consent agenda. Town manager is the proponent of this. And this is a standard article we have every year that authorizes the treasurer with the approval of the town manager and the select board to borrow funds in anticipation of revenue for the next fiscal year. Any questions on this one? Okay. Article 17, this is a majority vote, and this is brought forward by a citizen's petition. This is to see if the town will vote to note its support of Senate Bill 2259 in the 193rd session of the town Massachusetts General Court, which would formally name the renovated Winchester Center Station the John A. Volpe Winchester Center Station. And Mr. Vince Dixon is the proponent of this article, or the primary proponent of the citizens petition. So I would invite him if you want to say just a very brief few words with respect to this article. I think Patty has his hand raised. You can bring him in.
Okay, can you hear me okay now?
I can, yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you for recognizing me. Along the way, many people know that I'm a historian, and I was surprised to encounter that John Volpe did not even have a plaque in town. Governor McCall has a whole school named after him, and they are at different points in history significant residents of this town. It turns out that at an earlier level, before he was governor and well known, he was a state official who made the decision to lift the railroad crossing at Winchester Center Station higher up, elevate it. In doing so, there had been controversies for years. Presumably, by lifting it, it has saved lives and injuries and altered many things for the better. That alone, I think, recommends adding his name. It's not changing the name, but adding the name. In the process of doing this, I filed a bill since it is state property. Representative Donato from Medford and Representative Jones from North Reading have endorsed it. Rep. Day thinks it's a good idea, but thought I should also seek a sense of the town. And there are many other things that Governor Volpe did along the way, including having been U.S. Secretary of Transportation, ambassador to Italy, a long record of remarkable achievement, walking about town, having in World War II won election to the town meeting, going off within about 6 months to the Seabees, where he learned even more about the construction that he already did. And a remarkable person. Many people in this town actually remember him fondly. One person told me that he had been invited to his home, and on his kitchen table were the plans for expanding and redesigning Route 128. Talk about taking your work home. So this is to simply get the sense and hopefully the support of people in town to add his name to a station that has actually ultimately helped the safety and character of the town and his own achievements. 10 Everett Avenue, if you go by it, has a portico that his wife suggested to suggest the official public life that he was part of. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And I believe I will have a short few minutes at town meeting to show a few slides, including when he was a handsome and dynamic governor.
Great, thank you. There's a question in the chat. Is this symbolic only?
Is this symbolic only? Well, it's certainly symbolic. Some people think that people shouldn't be recognized, but we do have a record of recognizing people in town. Schools named after Lincoln and Morocco and Lynch and McCall. And typically when a station has something added to it, there's a little description about the person or the context of it. One of the more fun ones is down at Park Street, where there's a description of Charlie and the MBTA, the song that was made popular by the Kingston Trio. This, I think, is a good opportunity to educate as well as respect somebody that was fondly remembered and at some risk took on a controversy and did something good.
Great. I just want to clarify, Mr. Dixon, that this naming would be on MBTA property. There would be no naming of
Right, the
anything
naming
on
is
town
on
Winchester
MBTA,
property.
but it's Rep. Day who thought that the endorsement of the town would be a good thing. And I guess presumably give him a little stronger hand in supporting it.
Great. So there's a question in the chat that says, what funds are intended for the planned memorial?
I doubt there would be any substantial amount of money to do it. I'm assuming that the signs and other materials are going to have to be reset for the reopening of the station. At an early point, I checked and talked about it with T Design people, handed out a little flyer, and several of the T Design people said they thought it was a good idea. And if this goes through and the bill goes through, I'll certainly work with them. That's why I recommended a Volpe working group to just collect thoughts about what should be in there so that there would be a review and there's nothing really missed along the way. But I doubt there'd be any substantial cost beyond what would have to be done with new signage for the station anyway.
Right, which is not paid for by the town. That would be paid for by the MBTA. Next question. Winchester has a committee on names to name the institutions you name. Has this been before them?
You're talking about a naming committee?
The question is, has this proposal gone before the Winchester Committee on Names?
When I turned it in, I had to collect at least 10 signatures. Rather surprisingly easily, I collected about 30 signatures. I was told by somebody in your staff that the naming committee would be informed. If I need to write a separate letter through your office to them, I'd be happy to.
And the next question, would the MBTA call be changed from Winchester Center?
Ask her to repeat the question.
Could you repeat that? The volume's a little low.
Sure. So the question is, would the MBTA call be changed from Winchester Center? So
I'm sure it's up to their discretion. I certainly would be talking with them, but I'm assuming that in point of practice, it would come out as something like Volpe Winchester Center Station. Not unlike other stations in the system that MGH name was added to Charles Street, so they'll say Charles MGH. The station's identity is still there with a slight addition to respect and recognize the context in which the station may be.
Great, thank you. Any further questions on Article 17? Okay, thank you, Mr. Dixon.
Thank you for the time, and I look forward to seeing you hopefully in an efficient town meeting over the next couple of weeks.
Great, thank you. Article 19 is a majority vote and is brought forward by our EFPBC. This is a vote to see if the town will appropriate funds to prepare an update to the 2016-2017 Winchester Public Schools 10-year facilities master plan. This is proposed to be funded through $145,000 to be appropriated from free cash. And I believe Mr. Chris Nixon is here in support of the article from the EFPBC. Mr. Nixon, if you have any words you'd like to share before we get into
I'm happy to briefly. Can you hear me okay, Beth?
I can, thank you.
Okay, thanks. I'm actually on the Leverett connector and I got a pretty scratchy connection. So hear me well. That's
you are breaking up a little now, so. We may have lost you, Chris.
A minute, can you hear me now?
Just barely.
All right, I'll try to speak slowly as I'm creeping up here. Approximately 10 years. We have a long history of this. It's very well received. SBA when we partner with them on projects. It's also been very helpful for us as a town for those important projects for which we are self-funded. So most recently, for instance, the expansion at the McCall Middle School. As I think you all are aware, we last sought funding for a master plan update in 2014 and 2015. So it's been about 10 years. The select board and the school committee about 2.5 years many of you remember, a substantial investment in that project Beth just mentioned, Project 10, our last flood mitigation project for the Morocco culvert, and also about $0.6 million to Morocco. The purpose of that money was only to extend the life of that building until a replacement sometime between 2028 and 2030. The school committee voted in December its intention to submit a statement of interest to partner with the MSBA on that Morocco redevelopment project when the next window opens for their core replacement cycle in January. That would be a joint submission with the select board. So certainly to bolster our case for a new Morocco, we need to be kind of really knowledgeable about not only our current enrollment, but what does the data tell us about future enrollment. So just as we did almost 10 years ago, the master plan would include a 10-year enrollment demographic study. So that would look at in-migration, out-migration, housing units, changes in the number of students per household unit. We'd be looking at zoning changes, looking at the future of North Main. We certainly take into account, for instance, we have plans through eminent domain the project is going to be, and that's going to be more units. So a pretty deep dive to give us an idea about what enrollment is going to look like long term. And that's really important because we don't know today if a new Morocco needs to accommodate 400 students or 500.
Chris, we're having a little trouble hearing you, so I think if it's okay, I'm going to jump to the questions. There's a couple of questions that have come in on the chat.
Sure.
So the first question is this expenditure in the Finance Committee budget already? No. Could you hear that one, Chris?
Can you repeat that? Can you repeat that, Beth?
Yeah,
what was the question?
The question is from Roger Wilson. Is this expenditure in the Finance Committee budget already?
Rogers. It is school's operating budget. There is some mention, I hope.
So, Chris, we're really not able to hear you. I don't know if there's anybody else from the school committee that might be able to jump on and answer any questions, or from the EFPBC.
Beth, if I'm still elevated, this is Stacy.
Yep.
I would assume, because this is a separate article, it is not included in the FinCom budget.
I would agree. Next question is from Milin. How does this enrollment study differ from the recently completed Donahue enrollment study?
I'll take. Can you hear me okay now, Beth?
A little bit. You're cutting out quite a bit. So.
Okay, I apologize. I'll try to talk really slowly. There is mention of the current enrollment study, the recent enrollment study that's in the Finance Committee report that was just emailed out to town meeting members. That's actually not a comprehensive long-term study. That's more of a short-term exercise. Superintendent needed some input from UMass to help bring enrollment into better focus.
Chris, you're broke up there at the end. Next question is, why not wait until Lynch is complete?
Yes.
Given our connection errors, I'm going to suggest that if folks have questions about this article in particular, unless there's anybody else from the EFPBC that's here and able to answer, or from the school committee, that we just postpone any. Oh, Michelle has her hand raised, so I don't know if Michelle, how do you want to let Michelle Bergstrom into the meeting?
I can try a little bit here, Beth. I know this is coming from the EFPBC, not directly from the school committee, but
thank you. I appreciate that.
the enrollment study that would be included in this would be a more complete enrollment study. The enrollment study that the school department recently did was a shorter term look at enrollment. It was meant to only look out about 5 years and to really help the school department define our class size and enrollment over that next 5 years, looking at the post-COVID era. So the enrollment study that we've done in the past master plan has been more of a long 10-year look that accounts for the 40B projects, not only currently in development, but those that are projected by the town. So the enrollment study that I believe would be part of, that the EFPBC would be looking for, would be a more complete one that would align with our needs in the school department moving forward. And I think Mr. Vanalia asked, why not wait until Lynch is complete? Lynch would be completed, we're looking forward to fall of 25. So we would look to be funding this enrollment study. EFPBC would be looking to do that now because there is a desire to move forward with Morocco. The timeline for that was, 28 to 30. So an enrollment study doesn't happen overnight. So the EFPBC would be looking to get funding on that to be able to work on that a little bit earlier so that we would be able to have that information as we look towards a new Morocco.
Great, thank you, Michelle. And then the last question, I don't know if you're comfortable answering this or not, but will the EFPBC potentially consider consolidation? For example, a new Morocco with capacity to include other functions such as administration, recreation, etc. I assume that the study would evaluate those types of things, but I don't want to speak for anybody.
Can you still hear me, Beth?
I can, yep.
So that is exactly, Ms. Herman, what the last enrollment study and master plan looked at was building use and the lifespan of the buildings and how the school department might use them going forward. So that is actually precisely what helped EFPBC plan for the school building projects that have been completed already, and why EFPBC would be looking to move forward with that now.
Great.
I believe.
Thank you. Thanks for jumping in here. I appreciate it.
I'm hoping that was helpful.
Okay. Not seeing any further questions on Article 19, we will move on to Article 20. Article 20 is a majority vote sponsored by the Select Board. This is the now fairly regular article that we've had before Springtown meeting to increase the town's water and sewer rates. This is a very kind of complicated table that we show here, but I just want to cut to the information that's included in the background of this motion. The changes that you see here represent a 9.5% increase in water and sewer rates for consumption after March 1st, and as well as an increase in the service charge from $30 per bill to $35 per bill. So that's 4 times a year that service charge is assessed. So I don't know if anybody from the Select Board wants to comment on this before we get into any questions.
I'll comment on this, Beth. I don't know if Anthea is still here, but so for town meeting members, you've seen these rates sort of moving up over the last several years. You'll hear at town meeting some of the background around not just a very wet summer that didn't have a lot of people having to use their own irrigation to water their lawns, but also increased assessments from the MWRA for our sewer usage and flow. So we've got just some unavoidable costs that we can't control. And this is the way we've decided to settle on the rates. So I think we'll have more context at town meeting. I don't want to turn into an entire background discussion.
And a question.
Thanks, Michelle. I was a little slow getting off mute.
Yeah, go ahead, Anthea. Sure. Please add. This go ahead.
No, actually, I might preemptively answer Roger's question, which is how do these rates compare to other towns? One of the things that you'll see that we're proposing for this motion is that we're increasing the service fee by $5, and that decision was based on looking at other towns and comparing the service fee in other towns to when we raised the service fee from $5 to $30, and then a comparison of uh, how that has grown in towns over time. So determined that, even though, we didn't necessarily want to raise the service fee because of the background, as Michelle mentioned, to the wet summer and the analysis, that it seemed in line to increase that slightly for this year, in line with other towns.
Thanks, Anthea. Follow up from Mr. Wilson. Has there been any review of operations to reduce cost growth? I'm happy to just kind of mention that the town every year we have a consultant that we work with. We do a mid-year evaluation as well as sometime in the November, December time range, and then another evaluation in March as we work with the board in reviewing whether there needs to be a rate increase. We look at a variety of things, including capital expenditures, of which there have been many related to our water and sewer system recently, as well as we have to pay our share of the MWRA water and sewer costs. And all of those things come in this, as most people know, the town operates a water and sewer enterprise fund, where these rates are used to fund our operations and as well as pay our bills related to a portion of the capital cost, not included in the chapter 110 share, as well as our MWRA operations. So there is always on the town side an interest in making sure our operations are running smoothly and as efficiently as possible, and I think we do a good job of that. But at this point, with the very, very wet summer we had last year and the increases in the MWRA billings, this rate increase is what we felt, or what the board felt was necessary to move forward. Any further questions on Article 20? Okay. Seeing none, we will move on to Article 21. So this is a standard article every year to hear the report of the Capital Planning Committee. Article 22 is the Capital Planning Committee's actual article for funding. So there are 8 motions under this article. Articles 1 through 5 and 8 are a 2/3 vote. Articles 6 and 7 are majority vote. So I will just very quickly run through the motions. Motion 1 is for the town to appropriate $143,000 from the Capital Stabilization Fund for ADA projects. Motion 2 is for the town to appropriate $500,000 from the Capital Stabilization Fund for DPW roads and sidewalks. Motion 3 is for the town to appropriate $40,000 from the Capital Stabilization Fund for the purchase of a DPW scissor lift and trailer. Motion 4 is for the town to appropriate $93,000 from the Capital Stabilization Fund for a DPW wood chipper. Motion 5 is for the town to appropriate $135,000 from the Capital Stabilization Fund for a DPW athletic field mower. Motion 6 is for the town to appropriate $150,000 from water and sewer retained earnings to go towards MS4 permit engineering. This is a standard article every year to bring us into compliance with our MS4 permit requirements. Motion 7 is for the town to appropriate $15,000 from the cemetery trust funds for the engineering work related to columbarium. And motion 8 is for the town to appropriate $90,000 of which $55,000 is from the cemetery trust funds and $35,000 is from the Capital Stabilization Fund for a new dump truck. I believe Roger McPeak is here from the Capital Planning Committee if there's any questions. I think there's one here in the chat. Roger Wilson, what is the total spending from all these sources on roads and sidewalks?
Off the top of my head, I don't have this year's Chapter 90 money, but between the $500,000 that we are appropriating and something a bit over $500,000 from Chapter 90, that gets us over our $1 million target, although that target should probably be going up at this point.
Correct. Yeah, we usually, like you said, I don't have the exact number off the top of my head for FY25, but it's usually somewhere around $520,000 or $530,000 in Chapter 90 money. Any further questions on Article 22? Okay. Oh, go ahead, Mr. Wilson.
Oh, so I just wanted to quickly ask, what's the breakdown between sidewalks versus the streets?
We don't make that choice. That's up to the DPW director and the town manager to figure out how they're going to work out their priorities. We have a database of roads and sidewalks that prioritize things. We do periodically do an optical scan of the streets, as well as take in information from residents, and that's compiled into a database that they utilize for prioritizing street repairs as well as sidewalk repairs.
So that's a question not of the capital committee, but of the town.
Correct.
What's the breakdown in where this money is going?
So this is one appropriation that's then used by the DPW for both road and sidewalk. And I think that, I don't want to speak for the DPW director who's not here this evening, but that split typically differs from year to year depending on the needs.
I think it would be relevant to the discussion at town meeting.
Okay, we'll pass that on to the DPW director. Thank you. Any further questions on Article 22? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to Article 23. This article is also sponsored by the Capital Planning Committee. And this, as Mr. Wilson alluded to in a previous question, is what we've gotten into a semi-regular rhythm here in requesting appropriation. This is for $600,000 to work towards the elimination of lead line services and lead necks in the town's water distribution system. This would be a borrowing authorization, and we were able to get those funds through the loan program from the MWRA. We are nearing the end. I don't want to say this will be the very last time we come to town meeting, but probably, if not the last, very close to the end of completing our program. And I think it's been a tremendous effort that the town has moved forward over the past 10 years or so. We've really been one of the leading communities in implementing this program and removing all sources of lead from our water distribution system. Unfortunately, the ones that are left to be done under this if not near last appropriation are the more challenging, more expensive ones. So I don't know if anybody from capital planning wants to make any further comments. I think Jimmy Johnson, the chair of the capital planning committee, is the representative assigned to this. Mr. Wilson has a question in the chat about how many connections are left. I don't have that number off the top of my head. I don't know if anybody from capital does.
I do.
If not, okay.
I do. So we have 91 either identified or need to be investigated connections left. It was a very intentional decision at the beginning of this program to attack the easiest ones and to get as much lead out of the system as quickly as possible. And as the town manager has indicated, that leaves us at the tail end with the most difficult ones to be completed. So there are 91 that remain, and I believe that 33 of those are yet to be confirmed as lead, and have to be investigated.
Thank you, Roger. Any further questions on Article 23? Okay, we'll move on to Article 24. This is another article brought forward by the Capital Planning Committee. This is a 2/3 vote. This is to see if the town will vote to appropriate a sum of money to pay the costs of the sewer pump station design, including engineering, design, and permitting. This is the sewer pump station that currently exists on Woodside Road that needs to be replaced. This is the first step in the process, is the engineering. So this would be a borrowing authorization, and then we'd be coming back once we have the engineering complete and have a better cost estimate for those construction funds. I believe Jim Johnson, the chair of the Capital Planning Committee, if you're here, or Roger, feel free to provide any additional information on this.
If I'm happy to. The town's gotten its money's worth out of this this current pumping system. It's a 1950s era system that is obsolete, that's requiring increased maintenance on it. So we certainly need to replace this, and we certainly have gotten our money's worth out of it.
That's for sure. Great. Any questions on Article 24? So thank you for including this. So you're very welcome. Article 25, this is again a capital planning committee article, 2/3 vote, and this is a biggie. I think we've been talking about this for a few years. We've previously appropriated engineering funds for this. So this project is for the repair and reconstruction and improvements to the South Reservoir Dam, which is where the town's treatment plant is located. The expected project costs are $6 million. And so this would be a borrowing authorization. And Mr. McPeak is here on behalf of the Capital Planning Committee. Roger, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Sure. This is something that we must do. It is not option. We are obligated by the Office of Dam Safety to perform these repairs. Initially, we thought that we hoped that it was going to be limited to, some tree removal, substantial tree removal. But as we got into it, we're doing so much work that we're obligated to bring it back fully into compliance with modern regulations that will involve some earth moving on the backside of the dam, in addition to the backside of the dam, and we'll put in a sediment filter, much like we did on the North Res Dam. So this is, knock on wood, a once in a lifetime sort of repair, and it is what it is, I'm afraid.
Right. A question in the chat. We already appropriated some money for engineering for removing trees. So the engineering money that was previously appropriated was for the total project design, not just related to for the tree removal, and the total engineering that we've previously appropriated somewhere around $500,000. There were two prior appropriations. Any further questions on Article 25? Okay. Moving forward, Article 26. This requires a 2/3 vote, and this is co-sponsored by the Select Board and the Capital Planning Committee. This is basically, we've come before a town meeting previously for funding to complete the engineering work related to improvements, safe traffic calming, and other pedestrian improvements around the Lynch Elementary School. And this is a request for a borrowing authorization for $2.5 million to complete the construction of that project. I don't know, I believe Michelle Pryor is still here on behalf of the Select Board. And Michelle, I don't know if you want to speak on behalf.
Yes, and I'll actually try to take up Jennifer's question. So as Beth mentioned, there's a Select Board policy to do traffic studies around any major school construction project. So we did complete a study around Lynch. There are traffic improvements, speed bumps and sidewalk bump outs and hardening center lines planned on both sides, Pond Street and the Horn Pond Brook Road side by Royal Street and Canal Street. The design Tool heard some comments from residents, outreached to the community. There were multiple, I think 3 public sessions. We'll have some of that detail on Monday or whenever we take this up at town meeting. And there were some very specific comments shared by Pond Street residents. Tool was in Monday night, came to our meeting and has made some additional changes to Pond Street, and will be increasing some flashing signage, some additional lines on the street around speed limits. And so yeah, the design did change, but it's still going to come in under this borrowing authorization. And I'll also note that when the Lynch School debt exclusion vote was held, there was a second ballot question which passed, which was to fund money into the Capital Stabilization Fund to pay for borrowing for these planned traffic improvements. I think that's what I would say on that.
Great, thanks, Michelle. Any questions on Article 26? Where can we get a copy of the plans? So I'm not sure that the final plans are up on the town's website yet, but we've had a variety of neighborhood meetings. And so if you go to the town's website, in the top right-hand corner, there's a pull down, I think, named Town Projects or something like that. If you pull down that menu, a variety of town related projects, there's information there, including the Lynch Elementary School. So you can go and click on there and get some additional information. There's videos from the previous neighborhood meetings that review each of the projects, and we'll be posting a copy of the presentation from the Select Board hearing or Select Board meeting earlier this week that Winchester reviewed the improvements on Pond Street to that site as well. Any further questions on Article 26? Okay, seeing none, we will move on. We're skipping, as I mentioned, all of the FinCom articles, so we're jumping ahead to Article 32. So Article 32 is our Personnel Board article. You should have received in your motion book packlet mailing a copy of the information related to Article 32. It's a separate document outside of the motion book. There are 4 motions being considered under Article 32. So first, there are 2 motions related to cost of living adjustment for municipal non-union employees. The proposed COLA is 2.5%. Motion 1 approves the changes to the applicable wage schedules. And then motion 1 is here at the bottom. And motion 2 actually funds the wage increases related to that cost of living adjustment. And this change will go into effect July 1st of 2024. Motion 3, it's to create a new licensed childcare director position on our town's compensation schedule. This will be a professional technical or PT 11 position, and this would become effective July 1st of 2024. And then motion 4 is a pretty standard article that we see every spring, which creates the FY25 unallocated wage account, which would be used to fund wage increases for the police patrol union, which is the only union we have that has not yet settled a contract. So I'm happy, I don't know if Peter Steinmetz is here on behalf of the personnel board, but if not, I'm happy to field any questions that there may be related to this article. Okay, seeing none, we will move into Article 33. Article 33 is a majority vote, and this article is co-sponsored by the Select Board, the Capital Planning Committee, and myself. This article is to appropriate $200,000 from free cash to a strategic maintenance fund for extending the useful life of town assets, including but not limited to equipment, vehicles, building systems, or any other town infrastructure, and further to authorize the town manager in consultation with the Capital Planning Committee to administer and expend the funds from said account effective July 1st of 2024. So this is an article that's been before town meeting, I think probably dating back almost 10 years now. It first was something that prior chair of the select board, Lance Grenzbach, had worked to move forward to create this, what we've been calling a strategic maintenance account or a deferred maintenance account, to really try to take care of projects and, as we say here, to extend the useful life of the town's assets outside of the normal capital funding cycle. Town meeting has funded this account every year since it was first brought forward. For several years, it was done as a standalone article, as you're seeing here. For a few years, we brought it back and put it on the yellow sheet. But in consultation with the comptroller and town council after last spring town meeting, the decision was made that it made more sense for it to, from this point going forward, to not be on the yellow sheet, but to actually be a standalone article, because this is not an account that's closed out at the end of the fiscal year like the remainder of the operating accounts that are on the yellow sheet. So the idea is that this account is used not just during the fiscal year, although for the most part, you know, we've needed all of the money in this account during that fiscal year, but the money does carry forward. The big change here is that in the past we've appropriated $100,000 from free cash for this use. And this year, upon my recommendation, we are increasing that to $200,000. So I don't know if anybody from the select board or capital planning wants to speak on this as well. If not, I'm happy to take any questions that folks may have. Okay, seeing none. Oh.
I was just going to say, this has been a very, very successful program for us. Please fund this program. This has been put forward and enabled us to keep vehicles on the road for 3 to 5 years beyond their expected life, instead of like driving them into the ground. It's been utilized on buildings and HVAC systems. This has just been a really successful program for us. This is good money spent.
Great, thank you. The question from Milan is, what was your motivation for increasing the funding? So I think just seconding what Roger said, this has been an extremely successful program, and we've spent pretty much all the money that we've had from past years. And I think there's a need, as we all see, from a capital perspective. And so it was my recommendation that we increase that funding this year, and we'll monitor it. You know, I don't know that we'll continue to appropriate or recommend the $200,000 in the future, or if we'll go back to 100,000 or a different number. But I think for this year, my recommendation is, based on the needs that we see across the town, that funding amount should be increased to 200,000. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. The other point would be that since the inception of this program, if you look at the CPI from then until now, the $100,000 has lost about $30,000 worth of purchasing power. So we are increasing it, but we're also sort of catching up to where we were.
Excellent point. Thank you. A question from Mr. Wilson. Would this include playground maintenance? I don't think we've in the past used it to fund playground maintenance. I think that's something that we could consider. Obviously, the money, as it mentions here, it's authorized by the town manager in consultation with the capital planning committee. Certainly, if we felt like there was something to do on a piece of playground equipment that would extend the useful life of that, I think it would be an eligible expense under this account. Any further questions on Article 33? Okay, seeing none, move on to Article 34. This is a majority vote. This article is co-sponsored by the Select Board and the EFPBC, and this is to appropriate $1.2 million to pay for the costs of replacement of flooring, athletic equipment, and furnishings in the Winchester High School gymnasium, including engineering and architectural services. And this appropriation shall be met by $240,000 to be transferred from free cash and $960,000 to be transferred from the town's overlay surplus fund. And I will hand it over to Chris Nixon if he has anything that he wants to add with respect to this project.
So Beth, hopefully you can hear me much better from my computer.
Yes,
I apologize to you and everybody on the lousy connection from the car. And I want to thank Michelle Bergstrom, who was winging it fabulously with the questions from Article 19. So a quick elevator speech on this project. There are two components of this project. The first is to replace the flooring in the high school gym. The flooring, if we are to replace it this summer, would be just a little over 18 years old. It's a resilient rubberized surface, typically doesn't last more than 15 or 16 years. It's like a rubber roof. They wear out and you need to replace them. The second element of this is a reconfiguration of the room, what we are sort of internally called turning the room. So if you can imagine, the courts have an orientation in that space today. The proposal is to turn those courts actually 90 degrees. And in doing this, our athletic director, our administration feels strongly we can more efficiently divide this space, run multiple contests, whether it's regulation games, small skill sessions, or even youth sports, more efficiently, but also more safely. The configuration of the space today, which I think it's fair to say everybody on this call, we sort of inherited it, does not work well. There are some safety concerns when we try to extend the bleachers. More than half of them actually no longer extend. The motors are burned out. They've just sort of died on that kind of sticky, soft surface. So the proposal, in addition to replacing the floor, and I should clarify, not with another rubber floor, but to go with a athletic grade maple floor, whose life expectancy would be greater than 40 years. That would permit us to put in new bleachers, new equipment that would not burn out on a soft floor. But more importantly, we'd be able to divide the space and provide some new equipment to accommodate basketball, volleyball, and wrestling. And we would also even be able to include a non-regulation track around the space as well. Other recent developments, the MIAA has recently voted rules that govern what's required if you want to host post-season tournament play. Given the configuration and capacity of the gym today, Winchester is no longer eligible to host postseason play beyond the first round in basketball. And rule proposals about to be voted on are going to put the same restriction on us for volleyball. Most of our student athletes play on hard maple surface when they're visitors at our peer districts in the Middlesex League. And districts like Lexington, Stoneham, and Woburn all have, floors that are approaching 20 and in some cases over 30 years old. Again, that maple flooring. So that's sort of the gist of what's proposed. It should be noted, I think, Beth, that the overall cost of the project is actually
estimated at over $2.4 million. That's both the full floor replacement, the reconfiguration, the new equipment. Internally, it was decided that we would, again, to be sort of safe, let's budget 2.6. The select board has generously encumbered $1.4 million in ARPA funds. So that's not subject to town meeting, debate or approval. And so it's that delta, that difference of 1.2 that is being sought from town meeting, and that's split between the overlay at 960 and the free cash at 240. And if it's approved, we have a design team lined up. The goal would be to have bid documents out in June or July. The project would start in August, so not complete by the start of school, but would be complete in time for the winter season to support those sports.
Great, thank you, Chris. Any questions on Article 34? Okay, seeing none, we will move to Article 35. Article 35 is a standard article that we see every spring. This is a 2/3 vote on the consent agenda sponsored by the select board. And this is for the town to accept the funds from the Massachusetts Department of Transportation related to Chapter 90. Any questions on this article? Okay. Next article is a standard one again that we have at the end of every Springtown meeting that if we need to basically have sort of a catch-up vote at the end related to any free cash or anything that needs to go towards the operating budget, this is typically where we do it. And then Article 37. So we've already talked about motion 2 under Article 37. And so there is a second or first motion, or motion 1 that's brought forward by the Capital Planning Committee under this article. This motion is for the town to create a committee to review and as appropriate recommend revisions to the existing guidance established prior to town meeting by prior town meeting subcommittees in 2002 and 2006 on how the capital and building stabilization funds are utilized by the town. This subcommittee will include the town manager, 1 member of the finance committee appointed by that committee, 1 member of the select board appointed by that board, 1 member of the capital planning committee appointed by that committee, and 1 or 3 at-large members appointed by the town moderator. Said committee will conduct its review and report back to town meeting in the fall of 2024 on any recommendations for revisions or guidelines. And I believe Jim Johnson, the chair of the capital planning committee, is here. Jimmy, if you want to make any comments related to this motion.
Jimmy, if you're here, can you please raise your hand? Yeah, he's not in the audience.
Happy to address it.
Go ahead, Roger. Thank you.
Sure. There's been a lot of conversation around how we utilize the funds and the over the past 4 or 5 months between FinCom and the select board and capital planning. And we've received an opinion from town council that we have been utilizing the funds properly per the votes at the beginning of the establishment of the funds, but also that the way that we have chosen to use those funds were through a subcommittee of town meeting in 2002 and 2006 that set guidelines. And as I mentioned earlier, these have worked well for us. Capital planning relies on those guidelines on how they fund projects, and town meeting through their 2/3 vote enforces those guidelines. However, since it's been through 2006, it is proper that we go back and we take a look at these things and say, are they serving us properly now at this point, 18 years later? There's some things in there that are a little bit dated, to be honest, and may need to be updated. But we believe that this is properly done through another town meeting committee that reports back to town meeting and updates those guidance on how we use the funds. It's that simple.
Great. Thank you, Roger. Happy to take any questions on motion 1 under Article 37. Okay, seeing none, I think we've gotten through all the articles, so unless I hear from anybody else, I think that completes our managers hearing tonight, or encourage, oh, one question coming in. Question from Carol Savage, could this be debated in tandem with Article 27? That is a decision for the moderator to make. So that's certainly something you could bring forward to the moderator. Okay. If there's nothing else, thanks everybody for your time this evening, and I look forward to seeing everybody on Monday, and hope that you'll attend the Finance Committee's hearing tomorrow evening as well on their articles. Thank you.